cleans up pipelines and sludge pits and all kinds of neat stuff. We do a medical grade DNA manipulation of microbes, and then we add some foreign DNA to it, kill all the living portion off, and then we do some real neat things with oil or chicken fat or paraffin. And we'd done about $700 million of business in China and had a lot of trouble getting those folks to pay us what they had contracted for. And we couldn't litigate in China because the oil and gas industry is of national importance to them. They're a net importer. They're going to overtake the United States in the importation of oil this year. And so there was not any kind of litigation that we could propagate there. So we began to look for new locations to move our business and our production facilities and everything. And we had some real good friends in Kuwait. They would like us to go there and build a plant. However, this was in 2005, 2006. The United States was beginning to talk friendly with Libya. And they had no new technology in the oil and gas industry for 38 years. So we said, gosh, this is probably a place we can do some business. So before the treaty was signed in 2006, we had attempted to find agents to get our products in there for testing and things like that, because that's always an important piece of the business. And in fact, here in Texas, there's a professor of geology, University of Texas, El Paso, Libyan. His brother still works for the National Oil Company in Libya, even though he was not a favorite person with that government over there. After about 6 or 8 months with him, couldn't get anything done. And Joanne had a friend that was a member of the royal family in England. He had been involved with Gaddafi on 2 or 3 instances where there was some political problems, and Lord Andrew had a newspaper and some other publications, and he had gotten to know Gaddafi for that reason. And he said he knew a friend that he had in Libya, and maybe we could get in through him. So up jumps the devil. January 1st, 2007, Joanne and I were the first non-government sponsored entity into Libya. And when the United States signed the treaty in 2006, they formed a commercial company as a part of that treaty. And the Libyans like companies with long names, and this name was Libyan American Consortium for Technology Transfer and Powder Babies Bottoms, and I don't know, it was a long name. And what their intent was to funnel nothing but government-approved entities into Libya. They didn't bother to tell the Libyans that. None of us companies knew that. So we went into Libya on our own, and we were so well received. It was phenomenal. We didn't know what we were getting into, but I had Joanne. She had a bushel basket full of scarves, and you know, we had our own security team there to protect us. And when we got there, it was exactly the opposite way. People were so friendly. Every time they saw us, they said, Americans, Mia in their language is 100%. Americans, oh, we're so happy to see you. Do you like our country? Can we help you? As we traveled all over the world for the last 30 years, I can promise you we don't get many smiles. When they talk about Americans, you get a frown. Everybody thinks we're the bad guys. Well, Libya was exactly the opposite. And the reason for that was that the Libyans had never owned their own property. For 8,000 years they've been occupied. And the first time that the Libyans ever owned their own dirt they were working on was when Gaddafi had that bogus coup, and he threw that old despot king out, Idris, who was installed, as the superpowers often do, somebody that they can control real well. But salaries of Libyan people were 60 dinar a year.
We're on right there.
Okay, do I have to look at that?
No.
I have to get some glasses if I'm going to read something. When I was in college, my mother sent me a letter. She said, I'm writing this letter very slowly because I know you don't read so well. But anyhow, you all enjoy this, and I'll try to include everything in there. They made 60 dinar a year. They had to blow this coup because this despot, he was just as bad raped the country, stole what he couldn't steal. France and England and the United States were stealing, and the people were in abject poverty. The bloodless coup, he left the country, and immediately the people were given ownership of the land that they had worked for generations and generations. And Libya at that time was producing about 3.7 million barrels of oil a day, and they're kind of like Venezuela. They produce as much gas as they do oil, so they were producing a lot of gas also. So with a population at that time was about 4 million people. What the Gaddafi administration did is they started taking the excess funds from the oil and gas industry and putting that back in the hands of the people. And in January 2011, before this NATO coup that took place in Libya, here were the living conditions in Libya. Young couple got married, the government gifted them $46,000 the day they got married to help them start their lives. Their first car cost them half a dealer invoice. Gasoline was 44 cents a gallon. Their condominium, which the government was building 640,000 new condominiums, 2,000 square foot to 2,700 square foot in size. And your condominium cost you 10% of your salary for 20 years. Then your title was given to you. All your electricity was free, water, black water, natural gas, all your utilities were paid by the government. Your hospitalization was paid, and if you could not get the treatment you wanted or you needed in Libya, then the government paid not only your medical costs, but they paid your costs of transport, etc. Not only your cost, but they paid to have a family member travel with you. If it was a woman, then they might have 2 or 3 family members travel with you. Education was paid to whatever limit your brain could support. We know a young man was getting his PhD in England. He had a wife and 4 kids. Besides fees, tuition, books, costs, etc., his stipend, monthly stipend, was £4,950, which was about $7,000 a month. So the people in Libya had it very good. Their average salary was $15,800 a year. That goes from 60 dinar, which would have been about $50 a year, to 15,800, which was the highest in Africa, higher than China and higher than India. And if you graduated from college and couldn't get a job, then the government paid you $15,200 a year until you got a job. Ramadan is their high season in their religion, and every person in Libya can go to any bank in Libya and get a 500 dinar gift for Ramadan. And if you're ever hungry in Libya, they don't ask for an ID or anything. You can go to one of their warehouses and get 50 kilos of rice and 50 kilos of flour and 20 kilos of cheese and 20 kilos of powdered milk and enough money to buy an animal, a goat or a sheep or whatever. And so people in Libya are not, they didn't have a bad life at all. They had a real problem on the northeast corner in the Darna to Brook area. They had a infestation of radical Islamists, and those guys had been a problem since, King Idris.
Pictures of Libya.
Can't see, the lights are there.
The lights are in.
The sun. What we have is the sun coming through the windows.
There you go.
Get the DVD, we'll put the slides directly in.
Okay. Well, she's going to show some pictures of Libya before. This is one of our favorite restaurants, and that's that's the museum, isn't it?
Yeah, that's historic.
And Libya, incidentally, has in the year 1, it had the largest Roman city in the world. Leptis Magna was in Libya, and to this day,
See, there's some pictures of it right there.
it's so untouched. You can walk on every portion of all these ruins. This is Leptis Magna. They have some really ornate mosaics on the floors in all over these ruins, and you can walk on those mosaics. You know, if anybody was a bad guy, they could reach down and grab them a handful of mosaic tiles, but people are allowed to go through their artifacts and everything unscathed. In fact, in this place, they had one of the, I don't know if we've got a picture of it here or not, of they had the old Roman communal bathroom with a little oval-shaped hole, and everybody, I mean, they're a horseshoe shape, and everybody come up, hike up their toga, and then drop it back, and they would do their business and talk to each other and read the newspaper. And quite an amazing thing. You could go down below and you could see how the slaves that were down there keeping all the water flowing towards the Mediterranean, and where they produced the hot water, how they had the heat exchangers and everything in there, and they had cold baths and hot baths and steam rooms and all that stuff. The amazing thing about the ruins in Libya is that they were pristine. You go to Rome or Turkey or Greece, all the white marble is black from people touching it, and the grease from their hands attracts the dirt. In Libya, they're all white. And Joanne's, her higher degree is as a museum history major. It's such a unique degree, I think there's only 3 other people in the world that are museologists, but she really liked the history of Libya and everything, and we found it quite interesting. Now, we traveled all over the country, and we did that to get to know...
There's the toilets, there's the bathroom.
There they are. We traveled all over the country because we needed to get to know the people. The reason for that, our first trip in there in January 2007, we signed a contract to treat 2,500 monster wells. The zones are 600 to 1,200 feet thick. That was about $1 billion worth of our product. So we were actually proactive to do anything we could do to garner that business. And on that first trip, the Libyans asked us to stay over. We planned to go in there for a week just to take a look-see. They asked us to stay over for about 10 days or 2 weeks so we could meet with a lot of their government officials, and we did every evening beginning 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night and running till 2 or 3 in the morning. We'd have a different minister come in and meet with us. And they asked questions about the outside world because they had been closed out for so long they really had no idea what happened outside of their borders. And they were so interested, they were so proactive to find out because they were excited to finally be able to get into the mainstream of the world activities again. And they were interesting people. We found them genteel. Joanne and I had originally gone in there thinking that we were going to find a bunch of bloodthirsty guys. Didn't find that at all. Exactly the opposite. In fact, we found out that Libyans were non-confrontational. Their tribal culture required that they resolve every conflict without any duress. So if you ran into somebody's car and it was your fault, then the man you ran into is going to forgive you, but you're going to owe him a debt. And next year, 2 years from now, he may call you and say, you know, my daughter's getting married, I would like you to provide the food for the reception. Wedding receptions are a big deal. And you're required to do that, and if you don't do it, then your family's required to step forward and do it, and if your family doesn't do it, then your tribe does it. And if 2 people cannot come to a peaceful resolution for a conflict, then they put those 2 people inside jail cells, and they feed them nothing but gruel and camel's milk until they decide to be peaceful human beings and resolve their situation. And I'm going to segue away just a second. In Libya, they're like all countries, there's a real problem. And the problem was with the Moriarty mafia. This was originally Turks that moved to Moriarty, converted to the Islam religion, and they were the mafia in Libya. They controlled everything with a real heavy hand. They got 60% of all the contracts without tender, bid, or anything. And then they would turn around and sublet those contracts out to foreign companies, and they might pay and they might not. But that was the only real problem we saw in Libya, was with that mafia. Well, every time Joanne and I would go back to Libya, we would get another piece of business. And before we were finished, in the first 3 years there, we had booked $5 billion worth of business. Clean up tankers and tanks, and they had these huge sludge pits in the desert that were like lakes. You could see them from the satellites. And of course, oil well rejuvenation, pipeline clean out, all the things that we do, and then some. So, you know, we were very, very happy with the opportunities there. And we closed the 2 factories in China, disassembled those factories where the Chinese wouldn't know how we made our suit. And then we looked for a good partner in Libya, because what we do very, very well is we make a unique product that does a lot of neat things to oil. What we did not want to get involved in is the local politics. And so we always look to use local agents or local entities and everybody to do the marketing and take care of the local politics, if you would. And so the factory that we had designed and had started to build in Libya would have been a $100 million facility, and it was, the construction on it actually started in the first week in February of 2011, about 5 days before NATO decided to come blow the place up. So we were completely devastated. We lost everything over that. But the thing that happened to us is we were asked to go back into Libya to head a non-governmental organization fact-finding commission. And nobody had ever, NATO, UN, nobody had ever gone in to verify anything that the rebels or the rats, as they call them in Libya, said. Because people in Libya were happy. And instead of that, they decided to do a no-fly zone and then attack Libya and blow it up. NATO committed 60,000 bombing sorties into Libya. That's more than World War II combined.
Wow.
So they blew the hell out of the place. The people of Libya were not involved in this. They were being attacked. The U.S. brought in 250,000 Al-Qaeda operatives, mercenaries, to conduct that war for them. And you say, gosh, why would the United States want to go and blow up Libya? There's only 5.5 million people there, and nobody knows anything about them. Well, the problem was, in the Treaty of 2006, Gaddafi was required to step down from power. Never heard that on the news over here, but that was in the treaty. So he stepped down. He was really an advisor then to the country. And he had a pretty fertile mind, and so he first thing he did is he thought up the African bank. When Joanne and I first went in there, the international bank was Western Union. And we were planning to be there a week. We were there almost 3 weeks, so of course we needed some more money. Had to go to Western Union because there was no international banking done in Libya at all. And that was of interest to me because I've never been a fan of the Fed or Euroclear or any of those guys. And so I thought, well, gee whiz, if these guys are running their own banking system, it might be a really neat deal. And the gold-backed currency for the continent of Africa was a reality. All the Arab countries had signed up to be members. The head office was in Comoros, which is a very poor island off of Africa. Half of the African Union members had signed up. And can you imagine a gold-backed currency for the continent of Africa? What that would have done to the Fed and Euroclear and all these paper bankers would have destroyed them. Would absolutely made that toilet paper that they're printing and asking us to use as money would have been gone. So they had to get rid of Gaddafi because of the gold-backed dinar. The second thing was AFRICOM. And the United States is bound and determined to have a war with China one day, sooner, better than farther off, and they want military control of Africa to keep those natural resources away from China. So AFRICOM is a new function required by the U.S. government to militarily control Africa. Libya said, we're never going to sign on to that. South Africa said, we're never going to sign on to that. There were 3 or 4 other countries also. But since Libya was the strongest country, the best thing to do is go knock them over, and then the other ones would fall in tow. And so AFRICOM was the second reason. The third reason was Gaddafi had investigated. He was a big African Union guy. signed here with the American Indian and broke all of them. Same thing happened in Africa. But Gaddafi started a process to bring a lawsuit in the international court for all those errors and omissions and deficiencies in those treaties. And that lawsuit had legs, as the attorney says, and it totaled $7 trillion. So, in the financial shape that Spain and France and England and Italy and Turkey and all these other countries are in, they could not afford that kind of lawsuit, period. That would have just destroyed them. So that was the third reason. Now, an extra added attraction that was the incentive to go ahead and just knock Libya completely off the map was Libya had $241 billion in cash and cash equivalents in the Fed system. They had $150 billion in Euroclear. On top of that, they had about $38 billion of cash inside the country of Libya. They had 179 tons of gold. They had a couple thousand tons of silver. They had, I don't know how many tons of all the other rare metals and heavy earths and stuff like that. So there's only 5.5 million people, and if you had to kill a bunch of them to take that country over and stop all these three big problems, well, you know, you got to break a few eggs and make an omelet. That was a quote from Hillary Clinton about Libya. So what they did is they manufactured a reason to blow up Libya. And they planned this many, many years in advance. The Treaty of 2006 required that Libya reduce its military strength by 50%, get rid of its nuclear enrichment material, and get rid of all of its offensive weapons. That was done. UN came in and eliminated all of their enrichment facilities. They cut their army by 50%, got rid of all their offensive weapons. Then a second treaty was signed in 2009, and this is when John McCain and Lindsey Graham-Stein, that bunch of yahoos, was in Libya. And on that treaty, Libya had to reduce its military another 50% and get rid of half of its defensive weapons. And Libya agreed to that on the condition that the United States would defend Libya in the event that it was invaded. Didn't know the U.S. couldn't be done the invasion, did they? So that was set in motion way back there. Now then, you can verify all this. This percentage read into the record in, I think it was March of 2011, that the United States, France, and England had conducted war games to overthrow an oil-rich North African dictatorship. And there were going to be 11 warships in the Mediterranean. They're going to do a no-fly zone first, and then they're going to bring in ground troops if necessary. They were going to be supported heavily by the local people. Those war games were held in October of 2010. Long time before Arab Spring ever started. And the March 16th date for their war games happened a month early. So this was a planned overthrow of that little country long, long, long time ago. And for the reasons that I mentioned, to protect the banks and all this other stuff, you know, I can promise you, Joanne and I could have negotiated a peaceful acceptance of those three things ourselves with those people, because they don't want to fight. Even when we were there as part of the NGO, the Libyans didn't want to fight. They just did not want to fight. We knew one of our good friends there had been the minister or had been the ambassador to Tunisia years and years and years ago. His weapons storehouse in his home was a Chinese air rifle. That was it. They didn't own any weapons in Libya. You didn't see any weapons. The police on the street didn't have any weapons. They just were not armed. And with this non-confrontational mentality, guys, you know, that was not a part of their mentality. That's not how they resolved anything. Now then, I'm going to ask Joanne to come up and give you all a pretty face to look at. Tell you some interesting things about women's rights and things like that in Libya that are not well known.
Susan Lindauer, and she was writing a bunch of articles from us, and she wanted to know about the women in Libya, because she said, we're hearing over here that women have no rights in Libya, that women can't do anything in Libya. I said, that's actually very, very untrue. It's the opposite is true. Women actually they were emancipated by Gaddafi. Slide's really bright. They were.
Please stand there.
Okay. Okay. They were emancipated by Gaddafi in the 1970s. They were not required to wear any special clothes if they didn't want to. In fact, Gaddafi didn't even like the headgear. But they were doctors and lawyers and mothers and business people, and they worked in the ministry. They did anything they wanted. They were free. They drove. They did everything they wanted. In fact, they fought in the army too in Libya. Libya was an incredibly progressive country, Muslim country. In fact, the most progressive Muslim country. The other thing that Jimmy didn't mention is that in February of 2011, the DOD made a statement that the Gaddafi security helped them more in fighting Al-Qaeda than any other group in the world. And 2 weeks later, he was the worst guy that ever lived. The bad thing is that he wasn't even in charge. For all these lies that were told were meant to foment war in that country, and the atrocities that happened that we witnessed there wasn't only the 60,000 bombing of schools, hospitals, date farms, homes. It goes on power plants, the Great Man-Made River. They bombed everything. But you had the Al-Qaeda on the ground chopping people up. Right now today, there is still continuing a genocide of blacks in Libya. There's mass graves of blacks there because the Al-Qaeda has raised their hand and said, we're going to clear this country of all black people. It's our goal. We can't even get the government here to pay any attention to it. So many, many atrocities are still continuing there, and Al-Qaeda is in that country. What happened to us is, you want me to start on that? What happened to us is the prelate of the Catholic Church, Bishop Martinelli, we knew him before, and he invited us over to visit with him. The Pope had asked that he could send, he had a patron who wanted to send a ship full of medicine and medical supplies to Tripoli, not to Benghazi, not to the other side, but to Tripoli. NATO had an embargo against all the people that were not behind NATO. So in Tripoli, they weren't letting food in, they weren't letting medicine in, they weren't letting water in, they weren't letting gasoline in, they weren't letting anything in. They were embargoing, which is a war crime in itself, because there's 2 million people in Libya. So in Tripoli, I'm sorry, 2 million in Tripoli. When we went over and talked to Bishop Martinelli, he said, we've offered this, the patron of the Catholic Church would like to send this ship, and he said the Libyans said, we don't want to look like we are needy, and we need help. So he said, can you help us get them to accept this gift? We weren't involved with the government, but we are with the tribes of Libya. We knew the tribes of Libya very well, and they're the shadow government. So we went and worked with the tribes of Libya, and that's why we stayed longer. It was taking us a lot of time. And we got stuck there all summer, 100 days, and NATO got tired of all these people fighting and wanting their rights and not liking the war, and so they did their Mermaid Dawn on, I think it was August 21st. They just brought in their black Apache helicopters and mowed people down in the streets. They bombed for 2 or 3 days. They killed 1,300 people in the first 2 or 3 hours. 5,000 people were wounded. And then they just started bringing in Al-Qaeda, shiploads of Al-Qaeda, these truckloads of Al-Qaeda people, and they looted cars, looted stores, looted hotels. They took whatever they wanted. Bearded people with, AK-47s. They brought them in from Benghazi, and we were stuck in the Corinthia Hotel. We were friends with the ambassador from Russia, and he knew that there was a ship coming from Malta to pick up the dignitaries who were there, and he asked if we would like to have our name put on that ship. And we said, yes, we would.
I'll tell you why we were friends with the Russian ambassador, South African ambassador. That's the only place you all can get an adult beverage. So we befriended those guys. But the reason I think that the invasion of Tripoli took place when it did is because on the 5th of May, the tribes of Libya had agreed to write a new constitution for the country. And it was the first time in over 100 years that all the tribes had agreed. they never had complete unison on anything until that 5th of May convenio. And the Constitution was actually written and presented to Sheikh Ali, who was the supreme leader of all the tribes. That was presented to him on the
5th of May?
no. When they finished the Constitution, it was about the 18th.
It was probably the 16th or 17th of May.
No,
I mean,
of August.
Well, we were sitting with it when we got it.
About 16th or 17th of August. Now then, if the tribes of Libya, and everybody in Libya is a member of a tribe, so if the tribes of Libya produced a new constitution that everybody could vote on, what would that do to this falderah that NATO and this administration, everybody was putting out? Well, it would kill it. So before that constitution could be publicized, they then started to blow up Tripoli. And it was unbelievable to see that. You know, we were on the 21st floor of that hotel. We were looking out over the Mediterranean, and we could see 2 of those gunships. We could hear the 3rd one, and they were absolutely firing. They would just blanket a whole street, men, women, children, whoever. And Joanne said they killed 1,300 the first couple hours of that attack, and they injured 5,000. But on top of that, every single night, beginning about 1:30 or 2 in the morning, they would start dropping bombs. And they would continue all night, so that no one got any comfort from sleep or anything like that. And they blew up hospitals and clinics and water treatment plants, as Joanne said. All of those are outside the Geneva Convention. They blockaded gasoline, and all the military vehicles in Libya were diesel powered. So by blockading gasoline, that damaged the civilian population. Libya's a big country, 17th largest in the world, 7th largest in Africa, and all the people live basically in the perimeter on the Mediterranean, and then a few spots inside. But they travel long distances in Libya. And so to take their gasoline away from them, to cut down their power plants where they couldn't have air conditioning in the heat of the summer, you know, those things are unthinkable. Those are absolute war crimes.
They had fuel lines that went for 5 miles
Yeah.
during that summer. Trying to get fuel.
Now, I've got a question. It says, CIA operative Edward C. Wilson. You want to read that?
See, Wilson. Had tons of C4 explosives imported from Libya from the United States. Do you know what happened to all the C4 explosives?
Not only that C4, but a lot of other stories. And we do know what happened to that. The head of the Atomic Energy Commission in Libya was a man named Dr. Moriarty. He looked kind of like Einstein. And he looked like Peter Sellers when he does his Indian impression, you know. Funny guy. But he was educated here in the United States and then in England, nuclear physicist. And he, beginning in the 80s, he was flown into Florida in U.S. military aircraft and picked up yellow cake and took it back to Libya for enrichment. This has been going on since 87, 88, 89. They've been going on the whole time. So that's one you have to scratch your head on. So here's a bunch of C4 ones in Libya, sure. Because the Libyans are a closed shop. There's not any tourism there. The people inside Libya don't even travel within their own country. So it's a really easy country. If you want to start throwing lies about them, they don't ever defend themselves because they believe that the truth in their God is going to win. So they don't go defend any lies or misrepresentation. They do everything they need to do. So they were a really easy target for that reason. But this C4, and most recently, the 20,000 missiles that were delivered by the ambassador. He was the gun runner before he was ambassador to Libya, Chris Stevens. And he delivered 20,000 of the most sophisticated shoulder-mounted land-to-air rockets made. And they were delivered, man-pads is what they're called, they were delivered through Qatar into Libya. And none of them were used. Not a one of them was used during this long fight that went on by NATO. And so the United States says, well, gosh, we better get those back because those guys might come back and bite us in the backside. So they were aggressively trying to get those 20,000 rockets back for a long time. And the rest of that story is actually the night, and I've got to tell you this first, the tribal leaders and all the tribes of Libya have infiltrated all the cells of Al-Qaeda all over Libya. So they know what's going on, they know what those guys are planning all the time. And when the tribes told us that we have intelligence on what was said during that dinner that Chris Stevens had with the representative from Turkey right before he was killed, I said, oh great, what about that? Well, the representative from Turkey had dinner, and that was a CIA compound. It was never anything but that. It was never any embassy, never any consulate, nothing. And that dinner that they had, Chris Stevens was asking for the Turkish heads of the Turkish government to intervene to try to get these 20,000 man pads back, because it was a real problem for the United States, and they didn't want them used in friendly countries or not used without direction of the U.S. or whatever. And the Turkish representative, for all practical purposes, told Chris Stevens to pound sand. He walked out the front of that compound, he immediately went to a military airport, was flown by military jet to Turkey, and the minute his plane sat down in Turkey, that's when the fighting started. Now, in addition to that, we know that that whole attack and all those retributions against the United States were conducted and orchestrated and financed by Morsi of Egypt. And Dr. Jerome Corsi, broke that story about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that document, which was validated 5 ways, was read into Congress, and it states categorically that Morsi is the titular head of the Ansar al-Sharia, which is the Al-Qaeda sect from Egypt, and that they conducted that attack on that compound and killed Chris Stevens, and Morsi was the guy that was behind the whole thing. And the way they got this information is they captured a bunch of the guys that perpetrated those attacks, and I'm sure with just tickling with feathers or something got them to tell the truth, you know. And the name that popped up all the time was Morsi was behind the whole deal. Now, that document was delivered to the U.S. government, had to have been about the 20th or for sure by the 25th of September. Yet this administration is still defending Morsi to this day. So something's rotten, you know. And what has to happen is good folks like us and you all need to join hands and start taking a real critical look at what's going on, because things are rotten and things that don't make sense are being done for purposes that do not benefit the citizens of the United States. This is a great country. The people in the United States are great people. But when they cross the Potomac River, I think they check their man parts as they go across there, and they all just turn to slime. I call it the Potomac Syndrome. You can abbreviate that, take a couple letters of the first word, a couple letters of the second word, and that describes everybody in Washington, D.C. But what Joanne's trying to do now is get a Skype hookup with Dr. Corsi. We're not able to get there. He started writing articles based on our information after 9/11, and he's written about 12 or 14 articles. Joanne and I have always tried to stay out of the middle of it. We're business people. We're not reporters. We're not politicians, you know. And we got injected in the middle of this thing. And in the end, after the 100 days in Tripoli, we were actually captured by Al-Qaeda. We were taken to a torture center after we were there a long time. They had kangaroo court, big, fat, tall, bald-headed imam wearing a dress, beard and mustache. He came and looked down his nose at us, and what we didn't understand he said, because we didn't speak Arabic, was that when we went towards the rescue ship, we were to be killed, chopped up and burned, and blamed it on Gaddafi. And God gave us 3 miracles to get us out of that alive. In our troop, Joanne and I were the only Americans there. Well, I take it back. We were there, had been there all summer, and we appeared on a lot of TV shows and a lot of videos and everything. We told Libyan people they had the right to determine their own government. That was what we said. And that was enough of an offense against Al-Qaeda that we need to be killed. That's Al-Qaeda. That's who the U.S. installed in there as a mercenary to take over that country. And one of the rats, the Libyans call them, the rebels that were not, maybe not Al-Qaeda, but were going along with the revolution for monetary gain or whatever. One of them was the head of IT at the Corsi Hotel. Now, we didn't know that. He was not ever very friendly. All the other Libyans were real friendly. He was not very friendly, but the hotel had loaned us a van for us to drive to the rescue ship. We didn't know that the rescue ship had been fired on, and it was more than 3 miles out. So we're going up and down the coast road about 40 to 50 miles, back and forth from Libya back east, looking for this rescue ship. And the hotel had loaned us their van, and they had a driver, and they had another man sitting in the front, and they would tell checkpoint every 100 meters. AK-47s fired in the air, Allah Akbar, and the drivers and the other man were telling the Al-Qaeda guys that we were reporters. Well, they loved the reporters because the reporters were lying for them. So, Allah Akbar, and they let us go through. We just went back and forth and back and forth. We didn't know it at the time, but another U.S. guy named Franklin Lamb, a sorry piece of trash, he's an attorney, has 2 or 3 passports, he lives with Whistleblowers, he works for whoever he can peel money out of, and his favorite number is $300,000. He tries to get $300,000 from this group to go file an international lawsuit for him or whatever. We suspected him of being a bad guy, so I set up a sting between Joanne and myself, and we proved 100% he was a bad guy. And because of that, he had given the list of the 7 names in our group to these Al-Qaeda mercenaries to have us killed, because that was the best way to protect his spy status. And the 7 people were kind of interesting, Joanne and myself, of course. And then there was a Bahraini prince, there was the sister of the president of Mauritania, there was a Filipino woman who worked in the hotel for 20 years, there was the FIFA soccer coach from Germany, for Libya, and then there was a ne'er-do-well from Texas that had only been there a day or 2. He goes over, he told the Libyans he was going to be the next president of the United States. He was trying to sell influence or guns or whatever. His name's Michael Bradle. And so this was the 7 people, and they attached themselves to us because Joanne and I pretty well knew what was going on in Libya, and we had the ability to get a car when we needed, or get somebody to go get some gasoline so we could make some movements, you know. And so that was our entourage, 7 people. And the hotel agreed to loan us their van to go get on the rescue ship. And the second time we came back into the Tripoli port, we were in there about an hour, and this was the place you got locked down when you got inside there. And after about an hour, all of a sudden, 30 vehicles pulled up around us, AK-47s, pointed at us, held our head, and they said, this big, tall, hard-looking guy, he said, your game is up. We know who you are. We have a list. And he had the list with our names on it. And they took us from there to the torture center. And the next day, the driver of the van changed. And the man that came over to drive the van was the IT guy from the Corsi Hotel. And we didn't think anything about that. We thought maybe the other guy had to go back to his family, whatever. But this guy was real friendly with everybody that was in control of that torture center. And so when they finally agreed to give us our passports back, this was after a British film crew had filmed each one of us individually and taken our statement. We'd been treated well, we had been tortured, you know, and we were okay, etc. And they got us documented as being in good shape. Their plan was to take us outside 2 blocks away and finish us off. But when our passports finally came back, I was adamant to go to the rescue ship. I wanted to get the hell out of Libya, you know, I'd had enough of it. this young man took us aside, and he said, I've got to know you and your wife very well. He took Joanne with us, and he said, I've got to know you and your wife very well. You're good people. You've never done anything but trying to help the Libyans. But what you did not hear the imam say was that when you get in the van and go towards the rescue ship, that they've got 2 blocks away, they've set up a kill zone, and they're going to kill you and chop you up and burn you and blame it on Gaddafi. He said, I think I can go the back roads, go back the other direction, and get back to the Corinthia Hotel. I said, gosh, I want to go to the Corinthia Hotel. He said, now then, he said, the problem is these mercenaries, they're all getting paid to kill you. They're going to be paid 2,500 dinar to kill you and another 1,000 dinar to chop you up and burn you. He said, so you're going to have to pay them. And he said, I'll be able to negotiate that. And he said, these people, that was the head of the NTC and head of Al-Qaeda, couldn't know about it. So I was the only guy with any money. I had $19,800 left. So that bought the liberty of the 7 of us. Now then, didn't buy us complete liberty because we had still been in Libya, and the plan of these mercenaries was they're going to have another shot at us and get paid a second time. So, but at least we'd gotten out of that first hook. And then when we got back to Corinthia, the sister of the president of Mauritania, Fatima II is her name, she speaks Spanish, I speak Spanish, so we could communicate. And she said, one of the rebels that's in charge of the IOM rescue ship, I know him. I've known him for a long time. And she said, I think I can talk him into putting us on that ship that's going to Benghazi. And I said, oh, hell, that's going to the mouth of the snake. I said, that's where all those bastards came from, you know. She said, no, they're all over here fighting now. There's nobody left in Benghazi. They're all over here killing people in Tripoli. So if we get to Benghazi and we can get him to take us in town, not to the rescue camps in Egypt, then we probably have a better chance of getting out of there. And I said, do you think he'll do it? Well, he came up to our hotel room and he said, I know you all, and he said, I'm gonna personally take you and get you on that ship and make sure you're taken to the Beastie Hotel in Benghazi. So that was the second miracle. He had no reason to do that. Now, you've got to understand these Al-Qaeda guys. If you look at them wrong, they kill you. So the first guy was a rebel. He drove the van and got us out there. The second guy was also a rebel. He put us on the IOM ship. They're looking for us like crazy in Tripoli. They're looking for those 7 people. That guy looks like Santa Claus and his wife and those other guys, you know. We stood out. We were already on that ship and headed back towards Benghazi before they realized we were out of Tripoli. Now, that ship was a converted car hauler. It had 2 bathrooms. It was the end of August in the Mediterranean. It was hot. There was moldy bread, out-of-date juice, and hot water. And then, they had some little sweet cakes too. But when you drink the juice, you immediately were doing a green apple quick step. And there were about 350 people on that ship with 2 bathrooms. Not a pleasant deal. No curtains for the windows, no air conditioning. I'm telling you, it was 48 hours of hell. But when we got to Benghazi, sure enough, he was good to his word, and they put us on a separate van and took us to the Beastie Hotel. They loaded all those other poor people into buses and threw their luggage into dump trucks, and were driving them 12 hours to the Egyptian border to be in one of those refugee camps there. So we were very fortunate, and the reason he did that is because the U.S. had an office in that hotel, European Union had an office in that hotel, and he said, for sure, you should be able to negotiate some way to get out of this country. Well, I went to the U.S., first thing I did when I got to the hotel, went to the U.S. office, and the guy that was the U.S. representative spoke 8 words of English.
8.
He said, there's no Americans in Libya. What are you doing here? And I said, well, we're part of an NGO fact-finding commission. He said, no, there's no Americans, and there can't be any Americans here. And I said, well, can you help me get out? No, I only deal with the NTC and the Muslim Brotherhood and Ansar al-Sharia. He said, I can't do anything for you. So we left his office and went upstairs to the European Union office. And the guard that was outside that office spoke very good Texan English. He had been in University of Texas A&M for some time. So we immediately had a good rapport with him. He put us at the head of the list, got us in there to see the EU guy, and the EU guy said, you know, hell, you're Americans. We don't have anything to do with Americans. Wish I could help you. However, so we went back downstairs, and the guy that was the #3 man in the NTC was the phony government in the United States installed in there. And the #3 man in that government came to the hotel because the hotel had called him and said, there's an interesting looking group of people in the hotel, and somebody important should deal with them because there's a Bahraini prince, and there's, you know. Now, forget the fact we hadn't bathed in 4 days and hadn't anything to eat or anything like that. We were still more interesting than the rest of them. And he showed up, very well dressed, perfect English, suit and tie. He said, you must be hungry. I'm going to invite you to breakfast. This was the end of Ramadan for them. He said, I'm going to invite you to breakfast with us in the hotel tonight. They'll have a big buffet there. And he said, then I'm going to get you on a plane that's carrying a bunch of wounded soldiers from Benghazi to Tunisia. And he was, again, good at his word. That was the third miracle. Now, for sure, he hadn't gotten the word from Tripoli yet either. Otherwise, we'd never gotten on that plane. But we had a wonderful meal there, and then he had his own security guard take us to the airport, walk through all the bureaucracy. They were already learning how the bureaucracy in the United States works because they had lines of checkers to check all the documents. And he walked us through all that, got our bags checked, got us on that plane. In fact, they took us to the executive lounge, which was a beautiful conference room. It had food and snacks and everything in it. Big lounge chairs, you know, not many people there because they wanted to keep us away from the unwashed masses because we were being treated very well. And got on this airplane, and really, I guess there was a fourth miracle that we got to Tunisia because that plane was just a sorry shape. Doors were falling off, and when you look down 20 feet, you can see daylight. You know, not there yet. But we got to Tunisia. And the problem there was, again, absolutely no help from the U.S. government at all. And Joanne and I had spent all of our money saving the bunch. Joanne's about to get Dr. Corsi on. Dr. Corsi writes for the WorldNet Dating. He's a Harvard PhD, real bright guy, good guy, good lawyer. Yeah, he's a good guy. And we've put him in direct contact with the tribal leaders of Libya. He's conversed with them a bunch. And we're passing the best intel we get from them to him. And that's how it's getting out into the Libya. 2 documents have been read into the record of Congress.
They're trying to get your picture up on the screen.
So, you know, we're being a little thorn in their side.
It's gone?
There you go.
There we go.
They're all clapping for each
Turn
other.
this mic up.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
Can you hear me now, Dr. Corsi?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's very fine.
I don't know. Okay.
We can't hear her, we can get the mic to her.
We need a mic.
Give the mic to her. Yeah. Yes. Get him on the mic, okay? Get it to him.
Okay. Okay.
Get the mic to her.
Okay. Dr. Corsi?
I can hear you fine.
Okay. There's a lot of people here that would like to say congratulations congratulations to your latest article on Libya.
Yes.
Okay. If you would tell them a little bit about our relationship and what you know about the people we know in Libya.
Well, Joanne has been working with me now for well over a year, and introduced me to a group of Libyan expatriates in Cairo who had some extraordinary information about Libya, and we've been evaluating it at WND. I've been reporting on it as we can validate the information. But the core of what we've been learning is that the United States government, in terms of the intervention in Libya, has destabilized the country in favor of Al-Qaeda and rebels. And the expatriates in Libya are really wanting to get their country back. There are various tribes that are being oppressed by Al-Qaeda in Libya. Situation is really a very desperate criminal regime, and the United States has been on the wrong side. Obama has been supporting the Al-Qaeda side. I think there's some deep mysteries with regards to Benghazi. We've been learning of like an onion getting one level peeled back at a time. But the Obama administration continues to lie to the American people. There's not an Arab Spring producing democracy. There is a wave of Islamic repression going across northern Africa, and Libya and Egypt are at the center of it. And we're seeing increasingly repression of Christianity, repression of various tribes that want to live independently, and the United States on the side of various Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups supplying weapons. So that kind of gives you a little short summary of what we've been reporting, and it's been the information Joanne and the expatriates in Libya have provided us that have allowed us to document these reports.
Thank you, Dr. Corsi. Would somebody like to ask Dr. Corsi a question?
Bill, do you have any questions?
You're gonna take the mic.
Okay, I've got the mic. Does anybody have a question
Bill, do you have a question?
for Dr. Corsi? Alan S.
Make sure they speak up, too.
Hi, Dr. Corsi. Everyone understands that Libya has an extraordinary quality of oil and a high quantity of oil, but there's also something going on in Libya relative to the supply of fresh water. Isn't that true? And can you give us any insight into what's happened to that fresh water? I believe Gaddafi was going to set up a system to provide fresh water throughout the region, or at least, can you expand on that at all?
Well, we haven't had reports specifically on that, but I mean, water is critical in the North African communities. And the problem with destabilizing any of these regimes, including Mubarak in Egypt, is that all the systems of government go with the destabilization. So the people end up living a much poorer quality of life all around. I mean, the difficulty you've got with the tribal situation in Libya is just survival now. And it's tragic because, as Joanne can tell you, Libya is an energy-rich country. It ought to be producing, it ought to be generating revenue that the people could benefit from. And while Gaddafi had a number of problems to it, destabilizing Gaddafi and letting these radical Islamic groups take over mean that you've thrown the country into chaos. So there isn't going to be any fresh water, there isn't going to be any food. I mean, tribal groups have to worry day to day that they're going to be surrounded by Al-Qaeda and shell, bombarded with artillery. And that's happened in Libya since we deposed Gaddafi, and it's not been reported in the mainstream media press. We've had any number of reports coming out of the expatriates with videos, with photographs, showing the Al-Qaeda leaders in charge, showing the radicals, killing and repressing the various tribal leaders and the people in general. So, I mean, I think I've basically described Libya and
joining us.
Yeah, no, we're right closer.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Oh, I know what I was going to ask you. It was Walid Shobat read into the Congress. I saw that. There's a YouTube of him doing that on July 11th, I believe. What has happened after he did that? I mean, has there been any follow-up? He was sitting on a panel with some other people. What has happened with that document that has now been verified?
What document? I didn't hear the beginning of the question.
The latest
The
document.
latest document that was
What about Morsi?
The one about Morsi. It was July 11th that was written in.
Well, again, we published that document, and we made it clear that that Morsi, from the official report done by the Libyan government, was involved in and played a role in Benghazi in the attack, causing the attack. This came out very early on when you saw the translation of the videos that were coming out from the attackers in Benghazi, and they were speaking Arabic with an Egyptian dialect and terminology that was specific to Egypt. So we knew from the very beginning that the Egyptians were involved in the Benghazi attack, and that had been ordered and staged by Morsi and others within the Egyptian government. The problem is, you got the Obama so manipulating press that everything about Benghazi has been suppressed. The whipping up of the racial issues on Trayvon Martin, that serves, I wrote the book, What Went Wrong About the Current Election. It's my current book. Pointed out that I was using this tactic, there's no idea they could prosecute George Zimmerman in a civil rights case. Very cool. What was that? But by whipping up this racial sentiment, Obama not only gets his base solidified, but it pushes off the news any stories like the IRS story of the Tea Party groups or Benghazi and reports about Egypt being involved. So it's out there, it's published, we published it, it's widely known. But getting any action on it with mainstream media is compliant, goes along with Obama, is very hard to do. The American public are unaware of this. Largely, only the people reading the internet, only the people following the alternative media like WND are aware that these issues occur. And it's tragic because it allows Obama, who gets a pass from the mainstream media, to radicalize the Middle East, whereas if it had been George W. Bush, mainstream media and Obama would have been all over him from the very beginning. This is one of the problems with getting Obama in office, is the lying, the duplicity is done with the mainstream media going right along. It's very hard to break through that cycle. Publish the report, it's out there, but I doubt if anything's going to happen of it in immediate time.
I had a question.
Okay, I have another
Hank, this
question.
way, Hank. You need to stand by the computer so you can hear you.
Hello, I'm Hank from Dallas. I want to know if you know for a certainty if anybody in America is involved with the assassination or the murders in Benghazi. On the internet there was weird speculation. Somebody said Obama did it, somebody said Hillary Clinton did it, somebody said Romney did it. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I think the major question, and the House investigators are trying to get to it, is what happened that the stand-down order was given to the troops that were ready to go and intervene to try to save the embassy personnel over in Benghazi. When Sam Hall testified, I was there when he testified to the House committee, he said that there were planes with special forces ready to go to Benghazi, and they had been told to stand down. Now, who gave that order? The order was given. It's really one of the big questions. The White House has not answered that at all. I mean, the great suspicion is that Obama decided to not send military help and gave the stand down order. Why he did it is a matter of speculation. I mean, when you listen to Hall testify, and the issue was that, well, there was not a ability to refuel the airplanes coming out of Italy. Most of those fighter pilots, I'm sure, would have gone anyway and said, when we're in the air, you tell us where we're going to land. Or we'll ditch these planes. You can fish us out of the Mediterranean. But no good American fighter pilot is going to let Americans die when they have the ability to get there and intervene. So the next, I think, big issue in Benghazi is if the House investigators can force one of the survivors to testify. And there's a couple of survivors right now that are being contacted and being subpoenaed. I was talking to one of them today that said he was going to be testifying to or talking to the House investigators on Thursday. So that's, I think, the next possible break, is that we can get testimony from the survivors, so you can find out what happened on the inside. But it's very clear somebody told the U.S. military not to go.
Mr. Corsi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Corsi, sorry. Very simple question. With Syria, it looks like we're actually on the opposite side of what the Russians are doing with our Russian reset, supposedly. And does it look to you like we're making some of the same mistakes in Syria with the Muslim Brotherhood that we made in Libya?
I think so. It looks to me like we're going to be supporting the radical Islamicists again. I mean, not that Assad is any great deal to support. And quite frankly, I don't know. This whole theory has been developed that we ought to intervene just because people are going to get killed. And I don't know that there's a side here that makes sense to intervene on. If you intervene on the side of the rebels, you are helping Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood. If you intervene on the side of Assad, you're helping not only Syria radicals from the establishment, but you're helping Iran. And you've got Russia in there supporting Assad, you've got Iran supporting Assad, but I don't think we want to be in the camp of Al-Qaeda to oppose Assad. It's one of those situations in the Middle East where I don't think there's a good solution. I think the real tragedy is the innocent civilians who are going to get killed in the process, and it's further radicalization of the entire region. I know that recently, again, Israel intervened with launching an attack with a submarine to put out some of the missiles they're worried about, and Israel's got to be desperately worried that the situation in the Middle East is at any point a tinderbox with, if you take a look at where the Middle East was when Obama came into office, where it is